The woman with dirt under her fingernails and holes in her boots arrived in McGill, Nevada on a Tuesday in late August of 1884, carrying nothing but a canvas sack and the kind of exhaustion that settles deep into bones. Tessa Zimmerman had walked the last 17 miles after her horse went lame outside of Ely, and by the time she reached the dusty mining town nestled in the high desert, the sun was setting behind the Egan Range, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that might have been beautiful if she had the energy to notice. She was 22 years old, alone in the world and down to her last $3 after burying her father in a pauper's grave 2 weeks prior in Salt Lake City. McGill was a copper mining town, rough and growing, with more men than sense and more saloons than churches. The smell of smelter smoke hung in the air, mixing with dust and the distant scent of sagebrush. Tessa stood on the main street, looking at the buildings with their false fronts and painted signs, trying to figure out where a woman with no money and no connections might find work that would not cost her dignity. She had been a schoolteacher back in Ohio before her father's gambling debts had forced them west, chasing one failed opportunity after another, until he drank himself to death in a boarding house room that smelled of mildew and broken promises. A man stumbled out of the Lucky Strike saloon, nearly knocking her over, and she stepped back quickly, clutching her sack tighter. He mumbled an apology that reeked of whiskey and moved on. Tessa took a deep breath and walked toward what looked like a general store, hoping they might need help or at least point her towards someone who did. The proprietor, a balding man with suspicious eyes, looked her up and down when she asked about work. "Can you cook?" "Yes, sir." "The boarding house down the street might need kitchen help. Mrs. Chen runs it. Tell her Albert sent you, but I make no promises." Tessa thanked him and found the boarding house, a 2-story structure that looked more solid than most of the buildings around it. Mrs. Chen was a small Chinese woman with sharp eyes and quick hands who looked at Tessa's worn dress and tired face and seemed to understand everything without asking. "I can give you kitchen work and meals, but no room. Full up. $2 a week." It was not enough to rent a room anywhere, even if rooms had been available, which they were not. McGill was bursting with miners and workers, and decent lodging was scarce. Tessa took the job anyway because $2 was better than nothing, and at least she would eat. That first night, she walked to the edge of town where the buildings gave way to scrubland, and found a spot behind a cluster of juniper trees. She spread her blanket on the hard ground, used her sack as a pillow, and looked up at the stars scattered across the vast Nevada sky like diamonds on black velvet. She did not cry. She had learned that crying changed nothing. Bennett Nash first saw her 3 days later when he came into town for supplies. He was 26, tall and lean, with dark hair that curled at his collar and eyes the color of creek water after rain. He had a ranch 15 miles northeast of McGill, a modest spread where he ran cattle and horses, working harder than any 3 men combined to build something lasting in this unforgiving landscape. He had come west from Missouri 5 years earlier with his older brother, Daniel. But Daniel had been killed in a mining accident 2 years back, leaving Bennett alone with the ranch and a determination to make his brother's sacrifice mean something. He was loading flour and coffee into his wagon when he noticed her walking down the street with a basket of vegetables, probably heading back to the boarding house. There was something about the way she moved, with purpose but also wariness, like a deer that knows it is being watched. Her dress was patched but clean, her dark hair pulled back in a simple braid, and even from a distance he could see the shadows under her eyes. "Who is that?" he asked Albert, who was helping him load the supplies. Albert glanced over. "New girl, works for Mrs. Chen. Showed up last week from somewhere east. Keeps to herself. Bennett watched her disappear into the boarding house, then finished his business and headed back to the ranch. He had no reason to think about her again, but he found himself doing exactly that as he drove the wagon through the sagebrush, the wheels creaking and the horses plodding steadily under the hot sun. There had been something in her face, a kind of quiet strength mixed with vulnerability that stuck with him. Tessa settled into a routine. She woke before dawn, washed in the creek that ran behind the town, and worked in the boarding house kitchen until after dark, cooking and cleaning for the miners who rented rooms and ate Mrs. Chen's meals. The work was hard but honest, and Mrs. Chen was fair if not warm. The problem was where to sleep. Tessa continued camping behind the juniper trees, trying to stay hidden, but it was not a secret for long in a town the size of McGill. One evening, as she was settling down for the night, a voice startled her. "You know this is not safe." She scrambled to her feet, heart pounding, and saw a man standing a respectful distance away, hands visible and empty. It was still light enough to see his face, and she recognized him as one of the ranchers who came to town occasionally for supplies. She had noticed him because he was polite to Mrs. Chen, which not everyone was. "I mean no harm," Bennett said quickly, seeing her fear. "But a woman alone out here, that is asking for trouble." "I have nowhere else to go," Tessa said, lifting her chin. "Every room in town is taken, and even if there were one available, I could not afford it." Bennett frowned. He had heard about the housing shortage in McGill, but he had not thought about what that meant for someone like her. "What about the boarding house where you work? Full, Mrs. Chen told me." He stood there, turning his hat in his hands, clearly uncomfortable but not leaving. "This is not right. A woman should not have to sleep on the ground." "And yet here I am," Tessa said. "I appreciate your concern, but unless you have a solution, I would like to get some rest before tomorrow." Bennett nodded slowly and left, but the image of her spreading that thin blanket on the hard earth haunted him all the way back to his ranch. He lay in his own bed that night, in the small cabin his brother had helped him build, and thought about how much space he had, and how wrong it was that she had none. The next time he came to town, he brought a better blanket and a tarp. He found her behind the juniper trees just as she was finishing her workday. "These will help," he said, offering them. Tessa looked at the items, then at him, suspicion and gratitude warring in her expression. "Why are you doing this?" "Because it is the right thing to do." She took the blanket and tarp slowly. "Thank you, I will pay you back when I can." "No need." Bennett shifted his weight. "My name is Bennett Nash. I have a ranch northeast of here." "Tessa Zimmerman. Pleased to meet you, Miss Zimmerman." He tipped his hat and left before she could say anything else. The tarp helped when it rained, which it did occasionally even in the high desert, and the blanket was thicker and warmer than hers. Tessa found herself thinking about the rancher more than she should, wondering why he cared, what he wanted. Men did not do things for nothing in her experience, but Bennett Nash had not asked for anything in return, had not even lingered or made her uncomfortable. September came and the days stayed hot, but the nights began to cool. Tessa saved every penny she could, hoping eventually to afford a room somewhere, but prices did not go down, and her wages barely covered food and the few necessities she needed. She patched her dress again, resoled her boots with cardboard, and told herself she could endure anything as long as she kept moving forward. Bennett came to town every week, sometimes twice a week, always finding reasons to check on her without making it obvious. He brought her a coat when the nights got colder, claiming he had found it and it did not fit him. He left her a sack of apples from a trader, saying he had bought too many. Each time, Tessa accepted with wary gratitude, and each time they talked a little longer. "Why did you come to Nevada?" Bennett asked one evening in late September, sitting on a rock a respectful distance from her camp. Tessa wrapped the coat around herself. "My father thought there were opportunities here. He was wrong. And your mother died when I was 12. Fever." Bennett nodded. "My parents are back in Missouri. They did not understand why Daniel and I wanted to leave, but we needed to build something that was ours. Daniel, my brother, he died in a mining accident 2 years ago." "I am sorry," Tessa said, and meant it. They sat in silence for a while, watching the stars appear one by one. It was the most peaceful Tessa had felt since arriving in Nevada, and that scared her a little because peace was dangerous. Peace made you drop your guard. October arrived with cooler temperatures, and the first hints that winter was coming. The leaves on the cottonwoods along the creek turned gold, and the air had a crisp edge in the mornings. Tessa woke up shivering despite the blanket and coat, and she knew that sleeping outside would soon become impossible. Bennett knew it too. He lay awake at night, thinking about what would happen when the snow came. McGill was at nearly 6,000 feet elevation, and winters could be brutal. He had plenty of room at his ranch, but he could not just invite a single woman to live with him without ruining her reputation and his. The only solution was to build her a separate place, something she could call her own. The idea took root and grew. He had timber, tools, and skills. He could build a small cabin, something solid and warm, and she could live there safely. It would take time, but he could do it if he worked hard and fast. The question was whether she would accept it. He came to town on the first Saturday in October and found Tessa at the creek behind the boarding house, washing her spare dress. "Miss Zimmerman, I need to talk to you about something." She looked up, water dripping from her hands. "Is something wrong? Winter is coming. You cannot keep sleeping outside. I know, I am trying to save money, but it is slow." Bennett crouched down so they were at eye level. "I want to build you a cabin on my land, a small place just for you where you will be warm and safe." Tessa stared at him. "Why would you do that?" "Because it is the right thing to do. Because no one should have to sleep under the stars when they do not want to. People will talk. They will think things. Let them think. I know my intentions are honorable, and you will know it too. That is what matters." Tessa stood up slowly, her dress forgotten in the creek. "I cannot pay you. I am not asking you to. I have the materials and the skill. All I need is your permission." She looked at him for a long moment, trying to understand what kind of man would do this for a stranger. His face was open and earnest, no hidden agenda in his eyes, just genuine concern. "Why do you care so much?" "Because someone should," Bennett said simply. "Because you deserve better than this, and I can help." Tessa felt something crack open in her chest, some wall she had built to protect herself. "All right. Yes, thank you." Bennett smiled, and it transformed his whole face. "I will start tomorrow. It will take a few weeks, maybe a month if the weather holds. Can you manage until then?" "I have managed this long." He wanted to say that she should not have to just manage, that she deserved more than mere survival, but he held his tongue. There would be time for those conversations later. Right now, he had a cabin to build. Bennett threw himself into the work with single-minded determination. He had built structures before, helped his brother construct the ranch cabin and various outbuildings, and he knew what he was doing. The cabin would be small, just one room with a loft for sleeping, but it would be solid and tight against the wind. He chose a spot on his property near a spring where she would have fresh water and started clearing the ground. Every morning he worked the ranch, tending to his cattle and horses, and every afternoon and evening he worked on the cabin. He cut and hauled timber from the mountains, shaped logs, and began laying the foundation. The work was back-breaking, but he pushed through, driven by the image of Tessa shivering in the cold, and the knowledge that snow could come any time after mid-October. Tessa continued working at the boarding house, but Bennett made sure she knew he was making progress. Every time he came to town, he told her about what he had done, and she listened with an expression that was part hope, part disbelief, as if she could not quite believe this was real. "The foundation is done," he said in mid-October. "I have started on the walls." "You are really doing this," she said, wonder in her voice. "I told you I would. No one has ever done anything like this for me before." Bennett looked at her, at the way the evening light caught in her dark hair and the vulnerability in her eyes. "Then people have been fools." Tessa felt her cheeks warm and looked away. She was not used to kindness, and she did not know how to respond to it. Bennett made her feel things she had not felt in years, maybe ever: safety, hope, something that might become more if she let it. As October wore on, the temperature continued to drop. Frost appeared on the ground in the mornings, and the sky turned that particular shade of gray that promised snow. Bennett worked faster, knowing he was racing against the weather. The walls went up, solid logs notched and fitted together. He built a fireplace and chimney, mixing mud and stones, making sure it would draw properly. He framed out a door and window, using real glass he bought in town because she deserved to have light. Tessa watched the cabin take shape on the Sundays when Mrs. Chen gave her a half-day off. Bennett picked her up in his wagon and drove her out to the ranch, and she stood amazed as the structure grew from foundation to walls to roof. She wanted to help, but Bennett insisted she rest, saying she worked hard enough all week. "You are building me a house," she said one Sunday, standing in front of the rising walls. "A real house. You need one." "I need a lot of things. Most people would not notice or care." Bennett hammered in another nail, then turned to face her. "I am not most people. I am starting to understand that." There was something in the air between them, unspoken but growing stronger. They talked while he worked, sharing stories about their lives, their hopes, their losses. Tessa told him about teaching school in Ohio, about the joy she found in watching children learn to read. Bennett told her about his dreams for the ranch, about the herd he wanted to build and the legacy he hoped to create. "Why did you never marry?" Tessa asked one day, surprising herself with the boldness of the question. Bennett paused in his work. "Never found the right woman, I guess. Ranching is hard and not everyone wants this life. Plus, after Daniel died, I was focused on keeping things together. And now?" He looked at her directly. "Now I am thinking maybe I was waiting for a reason." Tessa's heart hammered in her chest. "Bennett, I am not asking you for anything, Tessa. I just want you to know that building this cabin, it is not just about charity. It is about you. I have not been able to stop thinking about you since the first time I saw you." She did not know what to say, so she said nothing, but the look she gave him was answer enough. Something had changed between them, shifted from concern and gratitude into something deeper and more complicated. The cabin progressed rapidly through the last weeks of October. Bennett built a loft with a sturdy ladder, installed the door and window, and started working on a table and bed frame. He carved simple furniture from good wood, making everything solid and functional. Tessa brought curtains she had sewn from fabric Mrs. Chen sold her at cost, and together they hung them in the window. By the last week of October, the cabin was nearly finished. Bennett built a small porch, added a railing, and made sure every gap between the logs was properly chinked with mud and moss to keep out the wind. He installed a good stove he bought in town, better than the one in his own cabin, and stocked it with firewood. He built shelves and a cupboard, put in a washstand, and made sure everything was ready. On November 1st, he drove Tessa out to the ranch and showed her the completed cabin. She stood in the doorway, looking at the space he had created for her, and tears ran down her face. Bennett, this is beautiful. It is yours, for as long as you want it. She walked inside slowly, touching the smooth wood of the table, the sturdy shelves, the warm stove. There was a real bed with a mattress, blankets folded neatly on top. Dishes on the shelves, a lamp with oil, even a rocking chair by the fireplace. This is too much. I can never repay you. You do not have to repay me. Just be happy here. Be safe. Tessa turned to face him, and the emotion in her eyes made his breath catch. Why? Why did you do all this? Bennett stepped closer, close enough to see the gold flecks in her brown eyes. Because I love you, Tessa. I think I have loved you since I first saw you walking down that dusty street with your head held high despite everything. You have been through so much, and you just keep going. You are the strongest person I know, and you deserve someone to take care of you for once. She stared at him, and then she closed the distance between them and kissed him. It was soft and tentative at first, then deeper, filled with all the loneliness and hope and gratitude and love that had been building between them for months. Bennett wrapped his arms around her, holding her like she was something precious, and in that moment, everything else fell away. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Tessa smiled through her tears. I love you too. I did not want to because I was afraid, but I do. Do not be afraid. I am not going anywhere, promise. I promise. They stood together in the cabin he had built, holding each other as the light faded outside and the stars began to appear. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Tessa felt like she had a home. Tessa moved into the cabin that week, giving notice at the boarding house. Mrs. Chen understood, even looked pleased in her quiet way. That man is good. You take care of each other. We will. Living on the ranch was a revelation. Tessa woke up warm for the first time in months in a real bed under thick blankets with sunlight streaming through the window. She learned the rhythms of ranch life, helping Bennett with the animals and the daily chores. He taught her to ride, patiently showing her how to sit the saddle and manage the reins, and she discovered she loved the freedom of it, the feeling of the horse beneath her and the vast landscape stretching in every direction. They were careful about propriety, maintaining separate households even though their hearts were already bound together. Bennett courted her properly, having dinner with her in the cabin, sitting on the porch in the evenings and talking while they watched the sunset. He brought her small gifts, wildflowers pressed between book pages, a pretty stone he found in the creek, a set of silver hair combs from a traveling merchant. Tessa had never been courted before, had never known what it was to be cherished. She blossomed under Bennett's attention, her face losing the haunted look it had carried when she first arrived in McGill. She laughed more, smiled easily, and let herself believe in a future that included happiness. November brought the first serious snow, just as Bennett had predicted. Tessa woke up one morning to find the world transformed, white powder covering everything and more falling steadily from gray skies. She stood on her porch, marveling at the beauty of it, and felt grateful beyond words that she was not sleeping outside in this weather. Bennett appeared through the snow, riding his horse over from the main cabin. I wanted to make sure you are warm enough. I am perfect. The cabin is wonderful. He dismounted and stamped snow off his boots. The storm is supposed to last a few days. I brought extra supplies in case. Come inside and warm up. They spent the day together as the snow continued to fall, talking and laughing and being quietly domestic. Tessa cooked stew on the stove while Bennett mended tack, and it felt like they were already married, already a team. She caught him watching her with an expression that made her heart flutter, and she realized with startling clarity that she wanted to spend the rest of her life with this man. Bennett, she said suddenly, putting down her spoon, ask me. He looked up from the bridle he was working on. Ask you what? You know what? Bennett set the bridle aside slowly and stood up. He crossed to where she stood by the stove and took her hands in his. "Tessa Zimmerman, I know we have not known each other long, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. Will you marry me? Will you be my wife and partner and share this life with me?" "Yes. Absolutely yes." He kissed her then, deep and thorough, and Tessa felt like she was finally home, finally where she belonged. When they broke apart, both grinning like fools, Bennett said, "I will talk to the preacher in McGill as soon as the weather clears. We can get married before Christmas if you want." "I want." They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in McGill with Mrs. Chen and Albert and a handful of ranchers and townspeople in attendance. Tessa wore a simple dress she had made from blue fabric Bennett bought her, and she carried wildflowers dried and preserved from summer. Bennett wore his best suit, his hair neatly combed, his eyes shining with love and promise. The ceremony was short and sweet, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Bennett kissed her with such tenderness that Tessa felt tears prick her eyes. They were married. She had a husband, a home, a future. All the fear and uncertainty of the past months faded away, replaced by joy so fierce it nearly overwhelmed her. The wedding supper was held at the boarding house, Mrs. Chen's gift to them, and it was simple but perfect. They ate and celebrated with their small circle of friends, and then Bennett drove Tessa back to the ranch in his wagon, through the cold December night under a sky full of stars. "Where are we going?" Tessa asked as he passed the small cabin and headed toward the main house. "You are my wife now. We are sharing a home the right way." He had spent the past weeks fixing up the main cabin, making it nice for her. There were new curtains and a quilt on the bed, shelves for her things, and a rocking chair by the fireplace. Tessa looked around their home, their shared space, and felt happiness settle into her bones. That night, they consummated their marriage with tenderness and passion, learning each other's bodies and hearts. Bennett was gentle and patient, making sure Tessa felt safe and loved. And when they finally fell asleep tangled together under the quilts, Tessa thought that she had never imagined life could be this good. Winter settled in hard and cold, but Tessa did not mind because she was warm and safe and loved. She and Bennett fell into the rhythm of married life, working the ranch together, cooking and eating and sleeping side by side. They talked about their plans for the future, about expanding the herd, about maybe opening a small school in McGill where Tessa could teach again. "You miss it, do not you?" Bennett asked one evening as they sat by the fire. "Teaching? I do. I loved helping children learn." "Then we should make it happen. Maybe after spring, when travel is easier, we can talk to the town council about starting a school." Tessa leaned against his shoulder. "You would support that, even if it meant me being in town several days a week. I want you to be happy." "If teaching makes you happy, then we will find a way." She kissed him softly. "I am already happy, but yes, teaching would be wonderful." Christmas came, and they celebrated quietly at the ranch, exchanging simple gifts. Bennett gave Tessa a beautiful leather-bound journal for writing, and she gave him a scarf she had knitted from yarn she bought with money saved from her old job. They cooked a special dinner and stayed up late talking about their hopes for the coming year. January and February were brutal, with storms that kept them snowed in for days at a time, but Tessa did not mind. She had Bennett, the warm cabin, and the knowledge that she was exactly where she was meant to be. They made love frequently, learning the ways to bring each other pleasure, and Tessa discovered a passion in herself she had not known existed. By March, Tessa realized she was pregnant. She told Bennett one evening after dinner, nervous about his reaction, but he picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. "We are having a baby. Yes, probably in October, I think. This is the best news, Tessa. You have made me so happy." She hugged him tightly. "I am scared. I do not know how to be a mother. You will be wonderful, and I will be right here with you every step of the way." Spring came, bringing green grass and wildflowers and the busy work of calving season. Tessa helped as much as she could, though Bennett was protective and did not want her overdoing it. She felt good, though, strong and healthy, and she loved watching the ranch come to life after the long winter. In April, Bennett took her to McGill to meet with the town council about starting a school. They were receptive to the idea, especially when Tessa explained her qualifications and experience. By May, it was decided that a small schoolhouse would be built, and Tessa would start teaching in September after the baby was born. "Everything is falling into place," Tessa said that night, lying in bed with Bennett's hand resting on her growing belly. "A year ago I was sleeping under the stars with nothing. Now I have you, a home, a baby coming, and I will be teaching again soon." "You deserve all of it and more," Bennett said, kissing her forehead. "I thank God every day that you walked into McGill. I thank Him that you noticed me, that you cared enough to help. How could I not? You walked into my life and changed everything." Summer was busy and full. They worked the ranch, prepared for the baby, and made plans for the future. Bennett built a cradle from smooth pine, carving little horses into the headboard, and Tessa sewed tiny clothes and blankets. They talked about names, debating and laughing, and finally agreeing on Daniel if it was a boy, after Bennett's brother, and Sarah if it was a girl, after Tessa's mother. In late September, as the leaves began to turn and the air took on that crisp edge that promised fall, Tessa went into labor. Bennett rode hard to McGill to fetch Mrs. Chen, who had experience with births, and then held Tessa's hand through the long hours of labor, wiping her forehead and whispering encouragement. The baby was born just before dawn on September 28, 1885. A healthy boy with a good set of lungs and his father's dark hair. Bennett cried when he held his son for the first time, overwhelmed with love and gratitude and the awesome responsibility of parenthood. "Hello, Daniel," he whispered, touching the baby's tiny hand. "Welcome to the world." Tessa watched from the bed, exhausted but happy, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. She had a family, a real family, a husband who loved her and a beautiful son and a life that was more than she had ever dared to hope for. The first weeks with the baby were challenging, filled with sleepless nights and the constant demands of a newborn, but they navigated it together. Bennett was an involved father, changing diapers and rocking the baby while Tessa rested, and Tessa found herself falling even more in love with him as she watched him with their son. By November, Tessa was ready to start teaching, and Bennett helped her prepare lessons and organize the small schoolhouse that had been built on the edge of McGill. She taught 3 days a week, while Bennett watched Daniel, and the rest of the time they worked the ranch together as a family. Life settled into a happy pattern. The ranch prospered, their small herd growing each year. Tessa's school became an important part of the community, and she loved watching her students learn and grow. Daniel thrived, a happy toddler who loved horses and following his father around. In the spring of 1887, Tessa discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier because she knew what to expect, and in December, they welcomed a daughter. They named her Sarah, and she had her mother's brown eyes and a sweet temperament that made everyone who met her smile. Bennett looked at his family, his wife and 2 children, and felt a contentment so deep it defied words. The ranch was successful, Tessa's school was thriving, and their home was filled with love and laughter. He thought about the woman he had first seen walking down the street in McGill, exhausted and alone, and he thanked whatever providence had brought her into his life. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset while Daniel played in the yard and Sarah slept in Tessa's arms, Bennett said, "Do you remember that first night I found you camping behind the juniper trees?" Tessa smiled. "How could I forget? I thought you were going to tell me to leave. I thought about what I could do to help, and building you a cabin seemed impossible at the time, but I could not stop thinking about you sleeping on the ground when winter was coming. You built me more than a cabin, Bennett. You built me a life." He took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "We built it together." "Yes, we did." They sat in comfortable silence, watching as the sky turned from blue to purple to the deep black of night, stars appearing one by one like they had that first night when Tessa slept alone under the Nevada sky. She thought about how far she had come, from that desperate woman with nothing to this, a wife and mother and teacher with a home and a family and a future that stretched bright before her. The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. The ranch grew, and Bennett hired help to manage the increased workload. Tessa's school expanded, and eventually, a proper schoolhouse was built with multiple rooms and a bell tower. Daniel and Sarah grew, and in 1890, Tessa gave birth to twins, boys they named James and Thomas, who were holy terrors from the moment they learned to walk. Through it all, Tessa and Bennett's love deepened and matured, growing from the passionate newness of those early days into something richer and more enduring. They weathered droughts and harsh winters, sick children and injured livestock, the death of parents and the loss of friends, but they faced everything together, their partnership unshakable. In the summer of 1895, when Daniel was almost 10 and helping his father with the ranch work like a little man, Tessa stood on the porch of their home and looked out at the life they had built. The main cabin had been expanded several times, growing to accommodate their family. The small cabin where she had first lived alone was now used for storage, but sometimes she walked out there and remembered those early days. Bennett came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. At 36 and 33, they were in their prime, healthy and happy and still very much in love. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Everything. How far we have come. How different my life is from what I thought it would be when I walked into McGill that day. Better or worse?" She turned in his arms to face him. "So much better. Better than I could have imagined. You saved me, Bennett. You saved me too. I was just going through the motions before you, working hard but not really living. You gave me purpose, family, joy." She kissed him softly. "We saved each other." "Yes, we did." That fall, Tessa received a letter from Ohio. Her father's sister, an aunt she had not seen in years, had tracked her down and wrote to say she was proud of what Tessa had made of her life. The letter included a small inheritance, money from the sale of the family property in Ohio that was rightfully Tessa's share. It was not a fortune, but it was enough to make a difference. Tessa and Bennett talked about what to do with the money, and they decided to use it to improve the school and establish a small library in McGill, something that would benefit the whole community. They also set aside a portion for their children's futures, making sure Daniel, Sarah, James, and Thomas would have opportunities and choices that Tessa had never had. The library opened in the spring of 1896, a small room attached to the schoolhouse filled with books donated and purchased. Tessa organized it with love, remembering how books had been her escape as a child, and she made sure every child in McGill had access to the magic of stories and learning. As the century drew to a close, the Nash family was firmly rooted in the fabric of McGill and the surrounding ranching community. Bennett was respected as a fair businessman and a skilled rancher. Tessa was beloved as a teacher and community leader. Their children were growing up strong and healthy, with good values and bright futures. In December of 1899, as the new century approached, the family celebrated Christmas with a special dinner and gifts exchanged. Daniel, now 14, was already taller than his mother and showing signs of becoming as strong and steady as his father. Sarah, at 12, was thoughtful and kind, helping her mother with the younger boys and showing an interest in teaching. James and Thomas, the 9-year-old twins, were full of energy and mischief, keeping everyone on their toes. After the children went to bed, Tessa and Bennett sat by the fire, holding hands and reflecting on the 15 years since they had married. "You remember when you proposed?" Tessa asked. "During that snowstorm in the cabin you built for me. I remember every moment of it. You told me to ask you, and my heart nearly burst out of my chest. I knew I wanted to marry you. I think I knew it from the first time you brought me that blanket and tarp." Bennett laughed softly. "I knew it the first time I saw you. I just had to wait for you to catch up. Well, I am caught up now, and I plan to stay right here by your side for the next 50 years. Only 50, I was hoping for more." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "However long we get, I will be grateful for every day." They sat in the peaceful silence of their home, the fire crackling and the wind howling outside, and Tessa thought about the journey that had brought her here. She had arrived in McGill with nothing but fear and determination, sleeping under the stars because she had no roof, no hope, no future. And Bennett had seen her, truly seen her, and instead of turning away, he had built her a cabin. But more than that, he had built her a life, a family, a home in every sense of the word. The cabin itself still stood on the property, weathered but solid, a testament to Bennett's skill and his love. Sometimes, on quiet afternoons, Tessa walked out there and sat on the porch, remembering. She remembered the first time she saw it completed, the way the tears had streamed down her face. She remembered the nights she had spent there alone, warm and safe for the first time in months, falling asleep with hope in her heart. She remembered the day Bennett had proposed, the way the snow had fallen outside while they declared their love inside. That little cabin had been the beginning of everything. As winter turned to spring in 1900, the new century well underway, Tessa discovered she was pregnant again at 35. It was a surprise, but a welcome one, and Bennett was thrilled at the prospect of another child. The pregnancy was harder than the previous ones, her body older and more tired, but she was healthy and strong, and the doctor in McGill assured her everything was progressing normally. In September of 1900, 16 years almost to the day after Tessa had first walked into McGill, she gave birth to another daughter. They named her Grace because she was a gift of grace in their lives, unexpected and precious. Daniel held his baby sister with tender care. Sarah fussed over her like a little mother, and the twins argued over who got to make her smile first. Bennett looked at his family, now complete with 5 children, and felt his heart overflow with gratitude. Tessa, recovering from the birth but radiant with happiness, smiled at him from the bed. "Our family is complete," she said. "It is perfect," he agreed, sitting beside her and taking her hand. "You are perfect. All of this is more than I ever dreamed possible." "Thank you for building me that cabin," Tessa said softly. "Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible to everyone else. Thank you for letting me love you, for building this life with me." They kissed gently, surrounded by the sounds of their children and the warmth of their home, and Tessa knew with absolute certainty that she had found her place in the world. She was no longer the woman who slept under the stars because she had no roof. She was Tessa Nash, wife and mother and teacher, woman with a home and a family and a love that would last all her days. The years continued to flow like water, bringing changes and challenges but also joy and growth. Daniel grew into a fine young man and eventually took over much of the ranch work, allowing Bennett to slow down a bit. He married a sweet girl from town named Emma, and they built their own cabin on the ranch property, starting the next generation of Nashes. Sarah became a teacher like her mother, taking over some of the classes at the school and showing the same patience and dedication that Tessa had always displayed. She married a banker's son who treated her like a queen, and they settled in McGill, close to family. The twins, James and Thomas, were inseparable and eventually started a freight business, hauling goods between the mining towns and bringing prosperity to the family. They married sisters, causing much laughter and confusion at family gatherings, and built houses next to each other in town. Grace, the baby, grew up surrounded by love and became a spirited young woman with a gift for music. She taught piano and sang in the church choir, bringing joy wherever she went. Through it all, Tessa and Bennett remained the center of the family, their love the foundation on which everything else was built. They grew older together, their hair turning gray, lines appearing around their eyes, but their devotion to each other never wavered. On a warm evening in June of 1910, Bennett and Tessa celebrated their 27th wedding anniversary with a family dinner attended by all their children and growing number of grandchildren. The house was full of noise and laughter, food and love, and as Tessa looked around the table at the faces of the people she loved most in the world, she felt a happiness so complete it brought tears to her eyes. After everyone had left, Tessa and Bennett walked out to the small cabin where it had all begun. It was still standing, though they rarely used it now except for storage. They sat on the porch steps, holding hands and watching the stars appear. "I built this cabin 26 years ago," Bennett said quietly. "I was so worried I would not finish it before the snow came. You finished it just in time, and it saved my life, Bennett, not just from the cold but from everything. It gave me hope when I had none. You gave me purpose. Before you, I was just a man working a ranch. After you, I had a reason to build something lasting." Tessa leaned her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, sage and leather and home. "Do you have any regrets?" "Not a single one. You. Only that I did not meet you sooner. But then again, maybe the timing was perfect. Maybe we both needed to go through what we did to be ready for each other. Maybe so." They sat in comfortable silence, the stars spreading above them like diamonds on velvet, just as they had the first night Tessa had slept under them, alone and afraid. But she was not alone anymore, and she would never be afraid again, because she had Bennett and he had her. And together, they had built something beautiful and enduring. In the years that followed, as Bennett's health began to decline with age, Tessa was there every step of the way, caring for him with the same devotion he had shown her all those years ago. And when the time came in the spring of 1918, when Bennett drew his last breath surrounded by his family, Tessa held his hand and whispered her love, thanking him for every moment they had shared. She grieved deeply, but not bitterly, because she knew how blessed she had been to have 33 years with a man who had loved her so completely. She continued teaching for a few more years, finding solace in her work and her family, and she lived to see her grandchildren grow and her great-grandchildren born. Tessa Zimmerman Nash died peacefully in her sleep in February of 1925, at the age of 63, in the bedroom of the house she and Bennett had shared for so many years. Her children and grandchildren mourned her passing but celebrated her life, remembering the strength and grace with which she had lived, the love she had given so freely, and the legacy she left behind. They buried her next to Bennett on a hill overlooking the ranch, and on her headstone, Daniel had inscribed a simple phrase that captured the essence of her story. She slept under stars until love built her a home. But the true monument to Tessa and Bennett's love was not the headstone or even the ranch that continued to prosper under Daniel's care. It was the family they had created, the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried their blood and their values forward into the future. It was the school in McGill that still bore Tessa's influence, the library she had founded, the community she had helped build. And it was the small cabin that still stood on the property, maintained carefully by the family as a reminder of where it all began. Every Nash child and grandchild heard the story of how their grandfather had built that cabin for their grandmother, racing against the coming winter to give her shelter and hope. They learned about the power of love and compassion, about seeing people who were invisible to others, about building something lasting from nothing but determination and care. The cabin became a symbol of the Nash family values: hard work, compassion, loyalty, and love. Young couples in the family sometimes spent their first night there after their weddings, connecting themselves to the legacy of Tessa and Bennett. Children played in it, imagining their grandmother sleeping under the stars and their grandfather working day and night to build her a home. Decades after both Tessa and Bennett had passed, the small cabin still stood, weathered by time but solid in its construction, a testament to the cowboy who had loved a woman enough to build her a future, and the woman who had been strong enough to accept it and build a life beyond her wildest dreams. Their love story became a family legend, passed down through generations, inspiring others to look for the Tessas of the world, the people who needed help, and to be the Bennetts, the ones who stepped up and made a difference. In the end, the cabin was more than wood and nails and careful construction. It was a promise kept, a life saved, and a love story that transcended time. It stood as proof that sometimes the most profound acts of love are not grand gestures but simple ones. Seeing someone who needs help and choosing to be the one who provides it, building something solid and lasting in a world that can be harsh and unforgiving, and believing that love and compassion can transform lives. The stars still shone over McGill, Nevada, just as they had the night Tessa first slept beneath them, alone and afraid. But now, they shone on a landscape shaped by the love between a cowboy and a woman who had nothing, a love that had grown into a family, a legacy, and a reminder that sometimes the coldest nights give way to the warmest homes, and the darkest moments precede the brightest dawns. The cabin Bennett built stood as eternal proof that love, when it is real and selfless and true, can build more than shelter. It can build a whole world.